Hello everyone, welcome back to Chenda DIY, and today's video I'll be showing you how to crochet a rib crop top. It is really easy pattern and friendly for beginners. And for this top, it is really easy to wear and take it off because the stitch of this top is really stretching. For this crop top, it is for size extra small and size small. And for you guys want to make this top bigger, I also showing you how to measuring it on your body and tell you how to make this bigger. Okay, now let's get into the video. First thing first, we are going to make the back part of the top. For this top, for the front part and the back part, we repeat the same thing. The difference is at the neckline part, and I'm gonna tell you later. To begin, we are working on the shoulder part. And for this top, we are working on the length way. And for the ribbing part of this top, we are working with the stitches up here too. To begin, make a slip knot. For crochet the top, I'm using 4.5mm crochet hook. And chain 80, it is equal 14 inches length. It's the height of my top. If you guys want your top longer, please add more chains. Remember, your foundation chains must be the even number. After you got 80 chains, next we are going to make slip stitch for the ribbing part of the top. For row 1, skip 1 chain and make slip stitch into the second chain. To make slip stitch, insert the hook into the loop, yarn over and pull through all the loops. Remember, for making the slip stitch stitches, always make it loose. It will easily insert the hook for the next row. Please keep making slip stitch into every chain until you got 10 stitches of slip stitch. Then I will meet you back again. After you got 10 stitches of slip stitch, then don't forget to use stitch marker to mark at the 10th stitch. It is easy to know where to start the ribbing stitch. Next, we are going to make the mark stitch. Make single crochet into the next chain. To make single crochet, insert the hook into the loop, yarn over and pull up a loop. And now you have 2 loops on your hook. Yarn over and pull through all 2 loops. After you have made a single crochet, then chain 1, skip 1 chain and make single crochet into the next chain. Please keep repeating this by chain 1, skip 1 chain and make single crochet into the next chain until you reach the end of the row. Then I will meet you back again. After you reach the end of the row, next for row 2, chain 1, turn your work, and we are going to make the mark stitch again by chain 1, skip 1 single crochet stitch and make single crochet into the chain 1 space. After you have made a single crochet, then chain 1, skip 1 single crochet stitch and make single crochet into the chain 1 space. Please keep repeating this into every stitch until you have one last stitch from the stitch marker. Then I will meet you back again. After you had one last stitch from the stitch marker, then make single crochet into that last stitch. Remove stitch marker and we are going to make slip stitch back loop only into every stitch until the end of the row. For making slip stitch back loop only, it is the same thing like we did in the first row. The difference is we just pick up the back loop of the stitch only. Like I said, for the slip stitch stitches, you have to make it loose so it will easy when you insert the hook through. So for the back loop of the last stitch, it is a little bit too small. You have to pull it loose. Like this, it's easy to insert the hook through. You guys can use stitch marker to mark at this first slip stitch. It helps you not to miss this last stitch. Next, for row 3 and row 4, chain 1, turn your work, and make slip stitch back loop only into every stitch until the end of the row. So for row 3 and row 4, we make slip stitch into the ripping part and into the moss stitch part until the end of the row. If your stitch looks stretching or curved, you can pull it a little bit to give a nice and straight. The reason why it curved because the slip stitch stitches, it is too tight than the moss stitch. That's why we have to make the slip stitch stitches loose. But when you pull it back, it will go straight, as you can see. And for this pattern, we are going to repeat by making 2 rows of moss stitch and 2 rows of slip stitch back loop only. And remember, for the ribbing part of the top, we always make slip stitch back loop only. Next, for row 5, chain 1, turn your work, and make slip stitch back loop only into the next 10 stitches. Then we are going to make the moss stitch by make single crochet. And then chain 1, skip 1 stitch, and make single crochet into the next stitch until you reach the end of the row. Then I will meet you back again. After you reach the end of the row, for row 6, chain 1, turn your work, and then chain 1, skip 1 single crochet stitch, and single crochet into the chain 1 space. Keep repeating this until you reach the stitch marker, and then make slip stitch back loop only into the next 10 stitches. It is for the ribbing part of the top. And next, we are going to repeat row 3, row 4, row 5, and row 6 until you reach row 20. It means that we are going to make 2 rows of moss stitch and 2 rows of slip stitch back loop only. From row 1 until row 20, it is equal 3.5 inches length. It's the measurement of the top of my shoulder. If you guys want it bigger, please add more rows by keep making 2 rows of moss stitch and 2 rows of slip stitch back loop only. And this is how I'm measuring on my shoulder. Like I said, if you guys want it bigger, please add more rows until you reach your shoulder measurement. And next, we are going to make decrease for the neckline. And this is also the different part of the neckline between the front part and the back part of the top. And right now I'm working on the back part of the top, and I'm gonna show you what's the difference between the front part. To begin, continue from where your last stitch is. For row 21, chain 1, turn your work and make slip stitch back loop only into the next 10 stitches, and then make mark stitch until you have 6 last stitches. Then we are going to skip that 6 last stitches. It is equal 1 inch. And the difference between the front part, we are skip 19 stitches. It is equal 3.5 inches. The reason why the front part we skip so many stitches because we want the front neckline is more deep and the back neckline is shallow. As you can see, when I place the front part of the top on my body, you can see how deep the neckline is. If you guys want it more deeper, please skip more stitches. Keep in mind that we still have to put some ribbing part around the neckline, so you have to make it a little bit deep to give some space for the ribbing part. And next, let's continue from where we are working on. So after you had skipped 6 last stitches, make sure that your last stitch is end with a single crochet. And next, for row 22, chain 1, turn your work, skip 1 stitch, and make single crochet into the chain 1 space. Keep making mark stitch until you reach the stitch near the ribbing stitch or until you reach the stitch that you mark. Then we are going to make slip stitch back loop only into the next 10 stitches. Next, for row 23, chain 1, turn your work, and make slip stitch back loop only into every stitch until you have 2 last stitches. Then I will meet you back again. After you had 2 last stitches, then we are going to make decrease by make slip stitch 2 together. To make slip stitch 2 together, insert the hook into the loop, yarn over and pull up a loop, and now you have 2 loops on your hook. Then continue insert the hook into the next loop, yarn over and pull through all 2 loops. And this is how we make slip stitch decrease. Next, for row 24, chain 1, turn your work, skip 1 stitch, and make slip stitch back loop only into the next stitch. Keep making slip stitch back loop only into every stitch until the end of the row. Then I will meet you back again. Next, for row 25, chain 1, turn your work, and make slip stitch back loop only into the next 10 stitches. Then make mark stitch until you have 3 last stitches. After you have 3 last stitches, then chain 1, skip 1 stitch, and then we are going to make decrease by make single crochet 2 together. To make single crochet 2 together, insert the hook into the loop, yarn over and pull up a loop, and now you have 2 loops on your hook, and then continue insert the hook into the next loop, yarn over and pull up a loop, and now you have 3 loops on your hook, yarn over and pull through all 3 loops. And this is how we made single crochet decrease. Next, for row 26, chain 1, turn your work, skip 1 stitch, and make single crochet into the chain 1 space. Keep making mark stitch until you reach the ribbing stitch or until you reach the stitch marker. Then make slip stitch back loop only into the next 10 stitches. Next, for row 27 and row 28, please repeat row 23 and row 24. It means that we are going to make 2 rows of slip stitch back loop only with decreasing stitch at the neckline. Then I will meet you back again. After you reach row 28, you must have 8 rows of decreasing stitch. It is equal 1.5 inches. If you guys want to make more decreasing rows, please keep repeating row 25, row 26, and row 27, 28. Next, we are going to make the straight part, which is no decrease. Just make normal rows of mock stitch and normal row of slip stitch back loop only. Continue from where your last stitch is. For row 29, chain 1, turn your work, and make slip stitch back loop only into the next 10 stitches. Then make more stitch until you have 3 last stitches. Then I will meet you back again. After you had 3 last stitches, then chain 1, skip 1 stitch and make single crochet into the next stitch. And now you still have 1 last stitch, so make single crochet into that last stitch. If this doesn't happen on you, it's okay. It's because of the odd number and the even number. If you end the row with a single crochet and no 1 more stitch left, it's okay. And if your row ends like mine, just repeat after me. Next, for row 30, chain 1, turn your work, and make single crochet into the stitch near chain 1. Then chain 1, skip 1 stitch, and make single crochet into the chain 1 space. Keep repeating this until you reach the ribbing stitch or until you reach the stitch marker. Then make slip stitch back loop only into the next 10 stitches. Next, for row 31 and row 32, chain 1, turn your work, and make slip stitch back loop only into every stitch until the end of the row. For the next row, please keep repeating row 29, 30, 31, 32 until you reach row 46. It is equal 2 inches length. It's the measurement of my neck. If you guys want it bigger, please add more rows by making 2 rows of mock stitch and 2 rows of slip stitch back loop only. And this is what it looks like on my neck. Next, we are going to make increase. Continue from where your last stitch is. For row 47, chain 1, turn your work, and make slip stitch back loop only into every stitch until you have 1 last stitch. Then we are going to make increase by make 2 slip stitch in the same loop. After you have made 2 slip stitch back loop only into the same loop. Next, for row 48, chain 1, turn your work, and make increase by make 2 slip stitch in the same loop. you have to pull the yarn a little bit loose so you will not miss the stitch for the next row. Please don't forget to use stitch marker, mark at this first stitch. It is easy to know where the last stitch is. Please keep making slip stitch back loop only into every stitch until the end of the row, then I will meet you back again. After you reach the end of the row, next for row 49, chain 1, turn your work and make slip stitch back loop only into the next 10 stitches. Then make mark stitch into every stitch until you have one last stitch. After you had one last stitch, then chain 1 and make 2 single crochet into that last stitch. And this is how I make increase for the mark stitch. Next, for row 50, chain 1, turn your work. Single crochet into the stitch near chain 1. Then chain 1, skip 1 stitch and make single crochet into the chain 1 space. Keep repeating this until you reach the ribbing stitch or until you reach the stitch marker. Then make slip stitch back loop only into the next 10 stitches. For the next row, please keep repeating row 47, row 48, 49 and row 50 until you reach row 54. Then I will meet you back again. And this is what it looks like after you reach row 54. You must have 8 rows of increasing stitch. It is equal 1.5 inches length. It is the same number like the decreasing part. Next, continue from where your last stitch is for row 55, chain 1, turn your work, and make slip stitch back loop only into every stitch until the end of the row. After you reach the end of the row, then chain 6. It is the same number like the other side that we skipped 6 last stitches. After you have made 6 chain, then add 1 more chain for the turning stitch. And this is the different part between the front side of the top. For the front side of the top, you have to make 19 chains and add 1 more chain for the turning stitch. It is equal 3.5 inches length. It is the same number like the other side. Next, continue from where your last stitch is for row 56. Skip 1 chain and make slip stitch into the next 6 chains. After you have made 6 stitches of slip stitch, then continue make slip stitch back loop only into every stitch until the end of the row. Next, for row 57, chain 1, turn your work, and make slip stitch back loop only into the next 10 stitches, and continue make the mark stitch until you reach the part that need the chain 6, then I will meet you back again. After you have made mark stitch until the part need chain 6, next we are going to make the mark stitch the same, but into the front loop of the stitch only, because it is difficult to insert the hook through both loops. So after you have 1 last stitch left, then make single crochet into that last stitch. Next, for row 58, chain 1, turn your work, and make single crochet, and then chain 1, skip 1 stitch, and single crochet into the chain 1 space. Keep repeating this until you reach the ribbing part, and then make slip stitch back loop only into the next 10 stitches. For row 59 and row 60, chain 1, turn your work, and make slip stitch back loop only into every stitch until the end of the row. For the next row, please keep repeating rows 57, 58, 59 and row 60 until you reach row 74, then I will meet you back again. And after you reach row 74, for the row that we start from the increasing stitch until row 74, you must have 20 rows of the shoulder part. It is equal 3.5 inches length. It's the same number like the first shoulder part. After you reach the end of the row, then chain 1 and cut off the yarn. And now we are done for the back part of the top, and this is what it looks like. Next, for the front part of the top, we are going to repeat the same thing like the back part. Like I said, the difference is at the neckline. For the front part, we skip 19 stitches, and for the back part, we skip 6 stitches. And for the decreasing part and the increasing part, we repeat the same thing. Next, turn your top wrong side out, and we are going to connect the shoulder part together. To begin, attach the yarn into both sides loop. And then chain 1. Next, we are going to make single crochet both sides together by insert the hook into both sides loop. Yarn over and pull up a loop, and now you have 2 loops on your hook. Yarn over and pull through 2 loops. Please keep repeating this into every stitch until the end of the row, then I will meet you back again. After you reach the end of the row, then chain 1 and cut off the yarn. And this is what it looks like on the wrong side. And this is what it looks like on the right side. Next, please keep repeating the same thing to the other side. For the next part, we are going to attach both parts together and then make the sleeves. To begin, attach the yarn and then chain 1. Then make single crochet both sides together into every stitch until you have 33 last stitches. Then I will meet you back again. This is what it looks like after you had 33 last stitches from the shoulder part. For the measurement from the top of my shoulder until the underarm part, it is equal 6 inches. And for my arm circumference, it is equal 12 inches. If you guys want your armholes bigger, please make less single crochet both sides together. For making the sleeves, I'm using 3.5mm crochet hook. Next, continue from where your last stitch is. For row 1, chain 1. So look at the stitch. We end with 2 rows of more stitch. So for the next row, we have to make 2 rows of slip stitch back loop only. You can use stitch marker to mark at this chain 1 stitch. It is easy to know where to make slip stitch at the end of the row. Next, please make slip stitch back loop only into every stitch until you reach the top of the shoulder. Then I will meet you back again. After you reach the top of the shoulder, let's look at the side. This is the part of the row where we start make the top. As you can see, this is the foundation chains. And for this row, we don't have the front loop or the back loop to insert the hook. You just make slip stitch into this single crochet stitch and into this chain 1 space. Keep repeating this into every stitch until you reach the end of the row, then I will meet you back again. After you reach the end of the row, next remove stitch marker and we are going to make slip stitch. After you had made slip stitch, next for row 2, chain 1, turn your work, and we are going to make another rows with slip stitch back loop only. As you can see, we still at the same part, which is the part of the foundation chains where we start at the beginning of the top. So we can insert the hook into the back loop of the stitch. You have to insert the hook into the front loop of the stitch, and when you flip it like this front loop is turned into the back loop. The purpose that I doing this because I already make slip stitch back loop only, and it turned out that I have one row that really pop up and it's not nice. It's not complicated if you try to watch and listen and note everything and remember how the stitch looks like. Keep in mind that we're doing this only at the part, where we start making the top, which is the row with the foundation chains. So keep making slip stitch into this front loop until you reach the top of the shoulder. Then I will meet you back again. this is what it looks like after you reach the top of the shoulder. Next, let's move on to the other part. It is the normal part, so you can make slip stitch back loop only into every stitch until you reach the end of the row. Then I will meet you back again. After you reach the end of the row, then make slip stitch into the chain 1 stitch. Next, for row 3, chain 1, turn your work, and don't forget to use stitch marker to mark at this stitch. We are going to skip this small loop that near the chain 1 and use stitch marker to mark at the next loop. It is the last stitch of the row. Next, single crochet into the stitch near chain 1. Then chain 1, skip 1 stitch and make single crochet into the next stitch. Keep repeating this around until you reach the stitch marker, then I will meet you back again. After you reach the stitch marker, as you can see, for this small loop, we are going to skip it. Then we are going to make slip stitch into the chain 1 stitch. This is the stitch that we make slip stitch, and for this small loop, we are going to skip it. It doesn't count as a stitch. For row 4, chain 1, turn your work, and make single crochet into the stitch near chain 1. Then chain 1, skip 1 stitch and make single crochet into the chain 1 space. Please keep repeating this into every stitch around until you reach the end of the row, then make slip stitch. Like I said, for the small loop that we make slip stitch or the small loop that need chain 1, it doesn't count as a stitch, so skip it. And then continue make slip stitch into the chain 1 stitch. Next, for row 5 and row 6, chain 1, turn your work, and make slip stitch back loop only into every stitch around until the end of the row, then make slip stitch. And this is what the sleeve looks like. If you guys want the sleeve longer, please add more rows of 2 more stitch rows and 2 rows of slip stitch back loop only. Next, we are going to make the ribbing part for the sleeves. Please don't forget to turn your top right side out before you working on the ribbing part. To begin, continue from where your last stitch is and chain 6. If you guys want the ribbing part higher, please add more chains. Next, for row 1, skip 1 chain and make slip stitch into the next 5 chain. Then I will meet you back again. After you got 5 stitches of slip stitch, then we are going to make slip stitch into the sleeve or into the slip stitch row. After you have made 1 slip stitch, then make another slip stitch into the next stitch. You must have 2 slip stitch stitches. Next, for row 2, turn your work. Skip 2 stitches that we make slip stitch, and we are going to make slip stitch back loop only into the next 5 stitches. Next, for row 3, chain 1, turn your work, and make slip stitch back loop only into every stitch until the end of the row. Then I will meet you back again. After you reach the end of the row, then make slip stitch into the slip stitch row for 2 times. Next, for row 4, please repeat row 2. Next, for row 5, chain 1, turn your work and make slip stitch back loop only into every stitch until the end of the row, then I will meet you back again. After you reach the end of the row, then make slip stitch. After you have made a slip stitch, then we are going to make slip stitch decrease by skip one stitch and then slip stitch into the next stitch. And this is how I make slip stitch decrease. The reason why I make slip stitch decrease, because I want the sleeve smaller to fit around my arm. Next, for row 6 and row 7, please repeat row 2 and row 5. For the next row, please keep repeating 2 rows without decreasing stitch and 2 rows with decreasing stitch. Keep repeating this around until you reach the end of the row, then I will meet you back again. And this is what it looks like after you reach the end of the row. Next, turn it wrong side out and we are going to connect both parts together. Insert the hook into the loop. Pull the yarn through the loop. Then chain 1. Make single crochet both sides together until the end of the row. After you reach the end of the row, then chain 1 and cut off the yarn. For the remaining yarn, please use the knit needle to weave in. And now you are done, and this is what it looks like. Next, please repeat the same thing to the other side. Next, we are going to make the ribbing around the neckline. But first, we have to make single crochet as a border. To begin, attach the yarn and chain 1. Then continue make single crochet into every stitch around the neckline until the end of the row. keep in mind for the neckline you have to skip some stitches so your neckline doesn't look like stretching or ruffle. You can follow me as I show you in this video. After you reach the end of the row, then make slip stitch to connect the row. Next, we are going to make the ribbing part. Continue from where your last stitch is and chain 8. Like I said, if you guys want it longer, please add more chains, and if you want it shorter, please make less chains. After you got 8 chains, then repeat the same thing like the ribbing part around the sleeves, but no decrease, just make normal rows and slip stitch into each stitch around the neckline. Then I will meet you back again. And this is what it looks like after you have made the ribbing part around the neckline. Next, turn it wrong side out and single crochet both sides together. And now we are done, and this is what it looks like. This top is really stretching and wearable, and it's easy to take it off. If you like this tutorial, please don't forget to click like and leave a positive comment down below. Stay safe and stay healthy, and I will see you guys in the next video. Bye bye.